Good afternoon. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about our 2024 in-house council compensation survey. Today's webinar is going to focus on the findings based in the Northeast region of the U.S. And to give us insight and their expertise on these numbers, I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleagues, Pam Salling out of our New York, New Jersey office and Chris Williams out of our Boston office. My name's Lauren Horan, and today I'll be your technical moderator behind the scenes. So if you have any questions, technical issues coming up, just shoot me a quick email, question in the Q&A, and I will help you out. Also, as you have questions relating to the webinar and to the data being presented, shoot your questions over. We'll do our best to get to them during the webinar, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. So before we get started, I just have a few quick housekeeping items to go over. Today's webinar, for all attendees, you'll be in listen-only mode and your cameras will be off. We expect the webinar to go for about an hour, including time for Q&A. And I wanted to let you know that a recording of this webinar will be available to all registrants. We'll be sending that out in the coming days. As I said, you can pose questions to our speakers right in the Q&A section of the webinar. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen. And at the close of today's webinar, we just have a short 1 to 2 question survey. We'd love to hear your opinions on how we did today, and if there's anything else you'd like to hear from us about in the future. And so now I'm going to hand our webinar over to Pam and Chris, who will be going through the data of the survey with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce to you Pamela Salling. Pam is a managing director in our New York, New Jersey office, practiced law for 15 years before gracing MLA with her presence. A couple of years back when I was starting the business, Pam was a clear rising star. She has now cemented herself as a constellation in this business, and we are super happy and proud to have her here. In the period of time that she's been here, she's placed over 100 attorneys in opportunities and jobs around the country, and so has an incredible depth and understanding of how this compensation framework works, and will bring a wealth of knowledge to the conversation today.
That's such a nice intro. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm so delighted to be here with all of you, and even more so to have the pleasure of being here with Chris. Chris Williams is director in our MLA office based in Boston, but he's also just an incredibly bright, funny, brilliant, and friendly person. He came to MLA after 20 years or more practicing early in big law, and then later as both a GC and a CLO. So he's going to bring a unique perspective to us as he analyzes legal recruitment and legal compensation trends for us today. Let's talk a little bit about how you can gain access to this full report. We've tried to make it really easy for everyone. Simply scan the QR code on your screen with your smartphone. You're going to be able to download the full comprehensive 2024 in-house counsel comp survey report, and it contains all of the data we're discussing today and a lot more. So we highly recommend that you download it for future reference. How did we get this data? We collaborated with WMG, inviting 35,000 in-house counsel to participate, and received more than 2,100 responses. The survey data contains responses from counsel all the way through GCs and CLOs. Before we dive into the specific data sets, we're going to go pretty deep both in national and in Northeast data. We want to give you some big takeaways. So thinking big picture, 5 key takeaways for you. The first is that CLO GC pay was stabilized since 2022, maybe even a little up. Variable pay was a little down. Northeast pay continues to drive a premium. Public versus private pay disparity. And if you zoom out in a 5-year view, you're going to see strong growth trajectory from 2019 through today. So Chris, can you start by telling us a little bit about the demographics of our survey respondents?
I would love to. We take this information we get from large swaths, but it's important for us to be able to say that we have touch on all parts of the industry and the roles and size and shape. So as we're looking here, you can see that the company revenue size used to be a big deal to make $1 billion a year as a company, maybe not as much anymore, but it still matters to understand how much revenue is coming into the organization. So company revenue here, you can see the framework or the percentages. And then What I think is really important and will trend through the rest of this slide is to understand that we had a fairly even balance in terms of public company versus private company response. That allows us to really have a sense of where the market is across the board without too heavy of a skew from one side to the other. I'm going to pass it back to you, Pam.
Perfect. So what stands out to me about the respondent demographics is the diversity of roles represented in our survey. GCs and CLOs make up 46% of our respondents, giving us a really nice, strong picture of top-level legal compensation. But we often also see good representation of other roles, from the deputy all the way to incoming counsel roles. Regarding gender, we're seeing 58% of our respondents identifying as men, 40% as women, with a small percentage preferring not to say or identifying as non-binary. In terms of ethnicity, you'll see the majority of our respondents are white, but we also see representation from Asian, Black, and Latino respondents as well. The diversity in our respondent pool is crucial to us. It allows us to examine factors like gender and ethnicity and how they might impact compensation across different roles, across different regions. It's an area that our profession still has some work to do in terms of ensuring equitable representation and equitable compensation. How do the US demographics compare to what we're seeing in the Northeast, Chris?
Well, they're very similar, actually. A slightly heavier skew towards folks who are categorized as white, but as you can see, a pretty solid demographic breakdown. And then from the respondent role perspective, almost identical to the national numbers. And it's not sort of an accident that MLA would have a sort of top-heavy general counsel response. They tend to be the most happy about getting their opportunities through us. So we're happy to see that, and it's a normal thing. Pam, I think it would be helpful to sort of give people that background framework as to what, when we get into the compensation, like what is that made of, and what does that mean, the numbers that we're giving? So why don't you give them a sense of that, if you don't mind?
Sure, we're going to say the word TAC, or say TAC, or the acronym TAC, over and over again. So as a quick refresher, that just means total actual compensation. It's a crucial metric for our survey. It's going to give a comprehensive view of what people are actually taking home. So TAC is calculated by adding the base salary for 23 plus the actual bonus paid in 23, not the target bonus that was in your offer letter. This gives us a real-world picture of total comp rather than just looking at base salary or target bonuses. This metric is particularly important because it's bonus structures that can vary significantly across markets and industries, but it also can reflect market conditions. We saw biotechs paying big bonuses during the pandemic, and then we saw bonuses cool a little bit as economic conditions were a little tighter, a little more headwinds this year. So this is a more accurate representation of total earnings. So we've defined TAC. Let's look at how it breaks down across roles nationally.
Right on. It's important to keep in mind that TAC does not include equity. So we're not talking about rolling equity that people might cash in at a particular time in a particular year, or the value of equity allocated in 2023. So this is purely just the cash. I wanted to touch on a point, and the benefit of having been a CLO and a GC here is that there are sort of two reasons for y'all to sit in the room and look at these things. One, of course, is to be able to measure yourself against the market and make sure that your pay band is appropriate, or to make arguments if not. The other is how you look at your team and how you spend the time to try to slot your team in and to budget that, to have those internal communications with finance and with your CEO about what your organization is. This is one of the tools we have. We have another tool we call Make Buy, where we can help you understand the difference between the value of performing work in-house versus hiring outside counsel to do it. But ultimately, you are responsible as the leader of your legal organization to manage a budget. And so as you can see here, for the first time, we're really starting to see a major gap in the break between what chief legal officers make and what general counsel make. It's not obvious or even clear what the difference in the actual performance expectations are, what the role scopes tend to be, but we are starting, and it's a full trend that we anticipate will continue to see a visual delineation between what chief legal officers and what general counsel make. If we scroll down just a tiny bit further in the slide, we also see that there's a difference between what associate and assistant general counsels make. That's an even more difficult one to really distinguish the difference. Those are very organization specific in terms of role and scope and size. Larger organizations are going to have a different breakdown than smaller ones, as you might expect. but it starts to help as you begin to level your organization, as you're building one, to think about which of those roles is more appropriate for your people. I'll pass it back to you, Pam, for TAC by role.
When we're comparing the national data to the Northeast data, we see some interesting trends. One thing that stands out to me is that compensation is generally higher in the Northeast across most roles. It's particularly noticeable in the GC role. While Northeast general counsels are earning about $590, we're looking at a national average of about $521. That Northeast premium is a little less pronounced for CLOs, but still very much present. We also see the gap between CLO pay and GC pay is a little smaller in the Northeast than it is nationally. Maybe this is due to a high concentration of large companies, financial institutions in the region, which may lead to more competitive GC pay here in the New York area and the Boston area. Interestingly, the premium is most pronounced, though, in our regional general counsel roles. This is, GC Americas, GC of different regions of the world or the US, with total TAC of 525 in the Northeast compared to only 467 nationally. This could reflect the importance of the roles of managing legal affairs in different states or in particularly important regions. How has TAC changed over time in these roles? Chris?
Yeah, we've been in the middle of a recession. Everyone's aware of that. And the expectation might be that the world has changed drastically when it comes to compensation. In fact, we see fairly flat, minimal change across the board when it comes to total compensation over the time period between our last survey in 2021 and our current survey in 23. Important to note that as we see at the bottom of the chart, counsel compensation has changed quite a bit. These are private and public companies, they're not law firms. And that is the level at which law firm associates generally tend to migrate into private companies. So you can see that to some degree, despite the fact that we have seen law firm compensation increase fairly steadily over the years, law firm lawyers making the transition into in-house have been willing to accept a little bit less in terms of compensation, probably also a nicer little piece of equity, again, not in this chart, but to help balance off that move out of the law firm into the company framework. What are you seeing what are we seeing in the Northeast on this, Pam? Sorry. Sure. I'm sorry, in the US on this.
No, as we just kind of zoom in on CLO GC pay, yep. I can tell you how that breaks down a little bit. The drop for GCs and CLOs was driven almost exclusively by bonuses. Base pay was up a little bit, maybe about 4% over the past 2 years. It has been a big drop in bonuses of about 10%, which is why we saw kind of overall just a small dip in pay. Interesting, while base pay increased slightly, we see that decrease in bonuses from about 304 to 273, leading a small overall decrease in TAC. This is maybe a positive shift in some ways. Here's why I say that. It's a shift toward more stable, predictable compensation structures, which could be a reflection of economic uncertainties and candidates preferring stable pay to performance pay. Often when we're negotiating pay and you give a candidate a choice between do you want a higher base salary or a higher percentage of bonus, they're going to choose base salary because it's the reliable format. This increase in base pay might also reflect an effort to attract and retain top talent. And the decrease in bonuses can simply be tied to performance, a conservative approach for variable times or variable economic headwinds. It's worth noting that overall TAC has decreased and the shift is slightly higher toward base pay, even if it means potentially lower compensation in the good years. When given that choice, candidates do choose stability, and companies are now choosing stability. So I think we should still be feeling particularly positive, particularly in the Northeast, where compensation for top legal talent in the major financial and business hubs like New York and Boston remain fierce, and pay keeps up with the demand for top talent. How do those changes compare in the Northeast more specifically?
Very similar to what we're seeing nationally. Strong numbers across the board, not a lot of change, which again, in a market that has been down is a positive. Also a bit of the shift as you sort of described with the lower overall bonus side of the structure and a higher side on base compensation. And again, for the CLO GC types in the room, there's an opportunity. Not every organization counts bonus against your departmental budget the same way they do base salary. And there is an opportunity to think about how you're budgeting for roles to negotiate or to offer a stronger bonus package in some ways to balance out the offset on the base pay framework. But for the most part, we're still seeing that bonuses as a performance of the actual corporation and not your department are lower across the board, but everyone's feeling that. So you're not going to have to worry about isolating or singling out people for disparate bonus frameworks. Where are we next, Lauren? GC compensation, national versus Northeast. Is that the right slide?
I think that our
I think
slides
it is.
are more deputy versus AGC. Next.
14.
Yeah, perfect. So as we look at this, we can see that there's a breakdown between DGC and AGC compensation. DGCs generally earn more than AGCs, with the gap being more pronounced in the Northeast. Interestingly, we're seeing the base pay difference being relatively small, but the bonus component being significant, which makes a big difference in overall total compensation. In the Northeast, DGCs have a slightly higher base than AGCs, but their bonuses are substantially larger, which is what's leading to the big overall disparity. Nationally, we see a similar pattern, but the differences are a little less pronounced. This might indicate that the Northeast is placing a premium on the additional responsibilities, the leadership expectations in the DGC role, and keeping their succession planning intact. Now that we've looked at some roles individually, can you give us an overview about pay between bonus across roles?
Right on. This is the first time you might notice that last column, folks. CCOs have been doing very well in terms of compensation across the board. Some of that is level setting for the importance of the role. Some of that is level setting for moving that role out of the general responsibility of the CLO or the general counsel. Having to stand up a separate compliance function has become incredibly important in finance. It's a standard of art in biotech and pharma, and other industries are following suit. And what we're seeing, of course, is as regulatory bodies and entities get more involved in this framework, it's more important to have a standalone CCO, and the compensation aligns with that. But as we're looking at our pay balance framework here, the CLO and GC obviously are still the highest proportion of the cash compensation versus their bonus component. Again, reiterating the framework of wanting to have a stable expected salary for the work being done, and seeing bonus as indeed a bonus and not the principal framework. But also keep in mind, as we've noted, with equity out of the picture, CLO GCs tend to have the largest equity frameworks as well. And in the middle of the chart is where it's a bit more interesting, where we're starting to see a significant climb, if you will, in terms of the compensation balance between regional general counsels, that's our RGC number, and deputy general counsels across companies, nearly balancing out. And then as we mentioned, the CCOs are just kind of way off the back end of the chart, but doing very well nationally. Next slide.
Perfect. There is a clear trend as you look at this chart, and this chart is looking at CLO and GC average TAC by revenue, and that trend is increasing compensation as company revenue increases. CLOs and GCs at companies with less than 100 million in revenue have an average TAC of about 371, while companies over 10 billion, we're seeing average over $1 million in terms of total actual cash. This is an interesting note. If you look at changes from 21 to 23 across these different revenue bands, the largest companies, those $10 billion plus companies, actually saw a slight decrease in TAC, while mid-sized companies saw increases. I wonder if this reflects cost-cutting measures from the largest companies during economic uncertainties, global supply chain issues, while mid-sized companies might have stepped up to compete for talent more aggressively.
Yeah.
How does that compare between public and private companies?
I think even on the last point that you made there, we saw some of the larger companies have to let go of some key staff members as well. It gave mid-sized companies an opportunity to take folks who are highly trained and highly skilled and had worked at the highest level for compensation frameworks that fit a little bit more tightly into their framework. So we did see absolutely a filter down from the top. If we're looking at the difference, and I noted earlier on that we had a fairly even representation between our public and private company respondents. So we feel comfortable that these are representative of the market. Not a big surprise that public companies will have a slightly higher base pay and a slightly higher bonus, particularly when you're talking about being able to convert equity to cash for some of these people. So I think that's part of why we see such a large gap in the 2023 TAC, is that public companies do have the ability to convert some of that equity into cash, and we're counting it as cash in the box framework. What about Northeast public by private?
As we look at Northeast public by private, we're seeing a lot of the same trends, but a huge disparity between public and private companies, with public companies out earning even without including the equity component, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the industry breakdown. This is, it's a little bit busy from a slide perspective, but it's somewhat fascinating because I think there's a natural inclination and expectation that finance and other places where lots of cash move through would be the overall leaders in terms of compensation. But it turns out, as we look at this, at the top of the chart, it's not just by alphabetical order. It seems it's also by its total value. Advertising, publishing, media have a huge percentage in terms of being at the front end of overall TAC. Some part of that is likely that we have had such a trend in terms of the growth of the media cycle, coverage of politics, coverage of international issues as well, has really raised the profile of media companies. But I think we also have lots of we gauge streaming services and social media, other things that will count in the media area and space that are really driving the change. And I think we have a question here. Actually, it'd be great to answer. Let's see here. Why are the TAC on the slide, US 2023 TAC by role, different from the totals on the slide, pay balance by role, national? Would you mind going back a slide for me there, Lauren? Okay. So this particular slide is our opportunity to take our individual respondents and kind of break them down from base and bonus as a general framework by category. And if we go to the subsequent slide, which I believe is slide, there we go. One more back, Lauren. I believe it's this one. No, this one. That might be right. What you have, the difference is that we broke those prior ones down into by role breakdowns, so that we could absolutely see the separation between what a CLO and a GC and an AGC, et cetera, was going on. And these are aggregate numbers. So there will be all of the roles top to bottom aggregated into the average breakdown, which would lead us to all right, where were we before the question?
We were talking industry pay.
We're talking industry pay.
Back to that slide.
Yep, no worries. Other trends, life sciences has held fairly strong. Real estate, again, nothing, not a huge surprise given the movement, but in a down market, sometimes the real estate values will come and go, and opportunities to see bonus compensation in those in that industry seems to help drive the total compensation framework there as well.
Very interesting. What are the top paying industries for CLOs and GCs in our region? Top 5, advertising, publishing, media, content is king. Number 2, professional services. Number 3, consumer products. Number 4, financial services. And 5, in life sciences. So this does differ somewhat from the national trends where we saw energy, utilities, telecom being a little higher. So this tracks with what we see in terms of our placements and our searches that come across our desk in the region as well.
So we mentioned the CCO framework a little bit earlier. We didn't want to just leave you hanging, get a little bit more in depth and a little more specific, if you will, about the difference that we're seeing between 2021 and 2023 in terms of total compensation, regionally and nationally. As you can see here, there's just a massive increase. We looked at the respondent numbers. We had about 9% of the respondents were CCOs on a national level, 16% on the regional level. So we're, you see it's something that breaks your chart a little bit like this. You have to spend a little more time digging into it to try to understand that. And it comes back down to the fact likely that the increase in sort of regulatory scrutiny for many of these companies have propelled them to create separate and independent and separately goaled compliance organizations. Oftentimes a new compliance officer coming in to fix an existing problem and reset an organization can be bonused based on their ability to do so. And whether or not that trend will continue over the next few years, we'll keep track of it. But for now, it's not the worst time in the world to become a compliance officer.
And if you're already a CLO, CCO, this is a great slide for you for maybe getting a raise this year. It's, increasing emphasis on compliance, ESG, risk management, particularly within the regulated sectors.
Absolutely. Pam, how would you feel about sort of walking us through some of the ethnicity breakdowns of the compensation we've seen this year?
Sure. If and how ethnicity impacts comp across different roles really is a crucial question for us in our business. It's important that we understand equity in our profession, or in some cases, the lack of equity in our profession today. We can see that compensation differences are very significant across different ethnicities and roles. This is a complex picture. It deserves some careful consideration, but to speak at it at a high level, we can see that Asian CLOs tend to earn above average pay, while Black and Hispanic CLOs tend to earn below average. This isn't consistent across all of the roles. Some key observations just at a high level are that white attorneys are generally earning at or above average for most roles. Asian attorneys are showing above average compensation in senior roles, less so in more junior. Black and Hispanic attorneys tend to earn below average in most roles, with a handful of exceptions. These are some findings that are highlighting an ongoing need for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within our profession. And it's crucial for organizations to dive in and examine their compensation practices to address any disparities that you have within your own organization, within your own team, and the universe that you can control. In the Northeast, given our region's diversity, especially within the major metro areas, addressing disparity is particularly important for us in attracting and retaining top talent from across all backgrounds. Chris, I wonder how gender impacts comp.
Yeah, let's move to the next slide. So similarly, we're starting to see, as we focus primarily on, there are new laws in place, there are new rules in place that are focused significantly on making sure gender equity is achieved across the board. The reporting structure of compensation inside of organizations, the opportunity to ask and be answered direct questions about compensation and where you sit inside of an organization. It means that we're having more transparency when it comes to pay, and as such, we're starting to see particular growth. As you can see, this GC line in particular, 26% increase in terms of the average TAC for women. And this is part of the leveling the playing field that we would expect in an environment where new regulation has come into place, but also part of understanding that the talent pool is moving a little bit in a particular direction, which allows folks who actually have shown improve their talent and ability to be paid at appropriate levels and standards. So across the board, we're sort of seeing the overall increase in terms of the gender gap, if you will, starting to move in the other direction, which I think is something that's incredibly important to accomplish. And we'd like to see similar numbers on the other slide that we presented there. So let's look at the whole legal department from a TAC perspective for,
I love this slide
yeah, this is
because it gives us perspective. You know, it zooms us out a little bit. It shows a 5-year trend in legal department compensation from 2019 to 2023. The reason I think this is so important is because we sometimes sit on some of these signs and say, in my industry, in my region, bonuses were a little down, panic. This slide allows you to zoom out and not to panic and see that there's some truly encouraging developments that should make all of us in the legal profession feel optimistic about our career trajectories. Starting at the top, we see fantastic CLO GC growth from 2019 to 23. TAC is up 14, almost 15%. This trend is underscoring that value is being placed on the legal department, on top talent, that business is valuing that partnership that's coming out of strategic legal departments, and this expanding strategic importance of legal leadership across organizations, both public and private. The regional GC role saw a 10% increase over this 5-year period. That's a substantial increase of $42,000 in terms of cash. And this trend highlights the increasing importance of regional expertise in a globalizing business world. We see the biggest increase, or at least one of the most exciting trends, I thought, with the deputy and associate pay going up almost 17% in 5 years, soaring from $345 up to $403. That's $58,000. And this trend is encouraging to our mid-year professionals who are wondering, what's next? I'm feeling stuck. Where can I grow? It's also showing that you as legal leaders are investing in your teams. You're advocating for your teams, and you're helping them feel valued and demonstrating that through incentive pay. This demonstrates a continued value placed on experienced professionals. And then one of the more heartening trends I thought was this trend for counsels, that after that dip in 21, likely due to pandemic hiring, we saw in-house teams reluctant to hire associates who weren't well-trained, who were trained remotely or hadn't had the law firm experience, kind of having that dip in pay. And now we're seeing it rebound strongly. From 2019 to 23, we see an overall increase showing resilience and recovery for our junior attorneys. Overall, I think these trends really paint a positive picture of our profession. We're seeing growth across all levels. We're seeing strong investments in our senior and mid-level positions. This speaks to succession planning and retention of great talent, not just hiring great talent, but keeping them in your seats. It's clear that organizations are recognizing the crucial legal roles that we play in the complex business environment. So I think this slide is really important to not get stuck on the small idiosyncrasies of bonuses went down in this industry or this region in this 2-year segment, but to really see that we're seeing a few things. Couple takeaways from the Northeast that we saw. Higher compensation across most roles, particularly the GC roles. A more competitive market for deputy and associate roles with nice bonuses in both of those roles compared to the national data, and a smaller gap between CLO and GC pay. And the high proportion of CCO roles are coming out of New York, which is one of the reasons why we saw that being so high, likely due to a high concentration of fin services and other highly regulated industries in the region. Chris, do you have any final thoughts before we do
Yeah,
Q&A?
particularly on this last slide, it's useful, again, when you're thinking about organizing your department, to understand that this information is available as a guidepost to you. The structure in terms of the differential between your CLO and your DGC, you can see the gaps are starting to close a little bit, and the difference between counsel and AGC. And it becomes really important as you're building departments to differentiate the roles and responsibilities in the scope, so that when you're having the conversation, you can justify, but also to really understand what your organization needs. And obviously we're happy to be here to have any conversation that you like, to answer any question in that framework. But the numbers are just the starting point. It really comes down to being able to have comfortable communication internally. So digest this, take it into your own thought process, and feel free to share it with other parts of your organization as a benchmark or a starting point, if you will, for conversations about how your department is structured and framed.
Thank you so much, Pam and Chris, for your insights. and expertise. That was a really valuable presentation. And for anyone who wants to dig deeper into the data, we again encourage you to look at our comprehensive report. We're showing the QR code again, just scan it on your phone and bring you to the report. We also wanted to just plug our upcoming, the remainder of our upcoming regional webinars in our series. So if you have any interest in learning about Southern California, Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, Midwest, and Northern California, right here on your screen, this will take you to a registration page. And I am getting some questions in about specific regions, New York City, for example. So I wanted to just share Chris and Pam's contact information, because we are happy to further break down this data for you. And also I had some questions about the slides. When we send out the recording, we can attach the slides to that as well for your review. But most of the most dense information you will find is in our report. But we'll send the slides because they focus on the Northeast. And so just for now, we have a few minutes for Q&A. And I just wanted to kind of ask a few questions that came in. One of the questions asked about predictions regarding the trajectory of compensation for the next few years. Do you have any ideas or kind of predictions of what we might see on our next comp survey in 2026?
Oh, this is a fun question, Chris. We both should predict and then see who's right.
Yes, for sure.
I think we'll see modest increases in base, especially for senior roles. I think we'll continue to see volatility across bonuses, especially depending on economic conditions and maybe even a little bit more industry variation. You probably see that in the biotech Boston market right now, that they're probably not expecting the bonuses that they did.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're moving into a world that's become more data driven. As you saw in the differential in the way that we built the chart from 2021 to 2023, the focus and breakdown of roles and responsibilities, and more allocation of a specific salary band towards that will lead to what might look a little bit flatter over time, because we're going to see so many roles broken down into the difference of $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 between one role and another. But over time, as we see the slow creep of recovery in the economy, the bonus side of compensation will increase, and that will be the major differentiator next year and the year after, from my perspective.
As well as that ongoing focus on equity-based compensation, particularly within public companies. And I hope that we continue to get more data on pay equity, across gender and ethnicity as well, as we're gathering that.
Yeah, just touching on that again, one other person said an equity question. If you could expand on that, they're wondering how equity plays into a package for a public company, CLO or GC.
It's a big part. And it makes sense. You can go look at public filings to really understand what the full compensation package for most CLOs or senior level leaders inside of an organization are. They are paid to have the organization perform, and that bonus framework is really the much larger part. Obviously, the larger the company, the more valuable the stock and the more valuable the equity component. And we start to see the real changes when someone moves from one company to another and they're transferring their equity framework from a pre-existing situation to a new one, as well as sort of a change in the vesting schedule, how that equity is distributed to folks. So depending on what year it hits, the value of the equity can be tremendous. It's just a case-by-case basis a little bit.
Yeah, with CLOs, we easily see equity packages ranging from 75 to over 100% of base salary. In some cases, equity, particularly within tech, within healthcare, equity can far exceed cash comp. We're seeing more RSUs, less options at more established companies. Vesting schedules that had traditionally kind of been this 3-year cliff, we're seeing retention plans change so that vesting can be more frequent. So you're not waiting for the 3 years. It's happening, 1 year and then every quarter thereafter, or every month thereafter. And all of this is to align executive interests with shareholder interests.
And again, at the larger companies, particularly tech companies that have that more traditional framework, you say 100%, you could say 400% for some of them, 500%, massive difference between the equity compensation. And it's an annual award framework that we're looking at when we talked in that number, not just the overall value of the equity over the 3-year or 5-year vesting cliff that might otherwise be in place.
That's right.
Great. Well, that will conclude our question and answer time. I again wanted to thank Pam and Chris for their expertise, and also wanted to encourage everyone, take a look at the survey. It really dives deeper into the data, and I think you'll find some interesting information there. And you will be hearing from us with a recording of this webinar. Reach out to us if you have any questions, and we are happy to assist you and give you further data as we can. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank Brian
you.
in the background for us as well.
Yes.
Really appreciate the information.